Well, welcome back everyone to Deeper Questions, where we love to dig into some of the toughest questions of the Christian faith. And today I'm here with Bishop Stuart Bell of the Anglican Convocation in Europe, somebody who I've known ever since I became a Christian at the age of 21. Bishop Stuart is one of the most important Christian voices in Wales today, after 25 years of leading the famous St Michael's Church in Aberystwyth. During his time, they sent over 50 people forward into ordination, including myself. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit about Christian apologetics, those tough questions of the Christian faith and their role in evangelism, which is something I know Stuart is very passionate about.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for your time today, Bishop Stuart.
It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, perhaps we could start with just a little 1 or 2 minute testimony of how you first became, how you became a Christian in the first place.
I'd have to start at the age of 12. My brother wanted to take me to church, and I didn't want to go. And I insisted with my mother, who wasn't going to go, that I was going to stay at home with her whilst my brother went. But in the end, I was not persuaded, but forced to go, very unwillingly. But remarkably, that Sunday morning, one visit, one sermon, I heard the Reverend David Abernethy talking about Jesus dying on a cross, and that he did it for me. And that was it. I was hooked. There's a ceiling boss in the inside of St David's Cathedral, and on it is the picture of a hand holding the stem of a cross, and underneath it are the words in Welsh, Daliaf am delir, I hold it, and it holds me. And it's that has held me ever since then, the age of 12, that if Jesus had given his life for me in order to bring me into a relationship with God the Father, then I owed him everything. But that was the beginning. It took me 5 years to consolidate that. So my relationship with God was a little bit like the spikes of a patient's temperature chart. 1 minute it was up and I was full of enthusiasm and I was the best Billy Graham in the school, and then the next minute I was telling the same stories that all of the other boys were telling. So it was up and down and up and down. But at the age of 17, I was cornered, really. I was cornered in my conscience, and I was cornered in my soul. And the issue was, if this is true, either I'm going to live for it or I'm going to ditch it altogether. As far as I could see, there were no half measures. It was either all for or all against. The one thing it couldn't be, which was what C.S. Lewis once said, the one thing that it couldn't be was of moderate importance. It was either of all importance or none. Yeah. So that was me, 17, and committed to Christ, and haven't changed since then.
And what were some of the toughest questions you had when you first came to faith at first? The biggest objections in your early walk that you ever had, and how did you find some of the answers?
Well, that's an interesting question, really, because having come to faith so young, I didn't struggle with some of the questions that some people are asking, like, is there a God, and what kind of a God, and how does he relate to us? The issues for me were more to do with the one that was the biggest for me was, what's the difference between the crucifixion of Jesus and the crucifixion of anybody else? Because literally thousands and thousands of people were crucified by the Romans, and it was their way of enforcing their power and of punishing the people that they didn't like. And it took me a while to understand the difference between his death and the uniqueness of it, and the deaths by execution of all of the other people that had died in the ancient world. And I had to ask questions, and I had some very helpful answers that I found entirely convincing, that this was a death entirely unique, and that it did something in terms of bringing humanity back into a relationship with God, that in Christ God was reconciling me to himself. Yeah.
Wow. What do you see as the relationship between the role of the Holy Spirit and the role of apologetics, of intellectual arguments, in bringing someone to faith. I mean, some say there should be no need for apologetics at all. They'll say, proclaim, don't explain. Whereas other people like me worry all the time that their arguments just aren't good enough, and that's why someone didn't become a Christian. How do you see that relationship?
I think that they go hand in hand. I've observed two ways in which people come to faith, and one is that the mind is the door of access, so that there is information about Christ. There's information about the Christian faith, which comes to the soul through the mind, and the soul catches up with the mind. The mind is informed. The mind says this is true, and the soul responds to it. So it's from the mind to the heart. But I've also observed that there are occasions when God does it in reverse, and he goes directly to the heart, and the mind catches up afterwards. There is an experience of God that cannot be denied, that cannot be interpreted in any other way than that this is God who's made his approach to me, and the mind catches up with that afterwards. And the mind then is asking the questions, well, what is this, and who is this, and what's he like, and what does he want of me? It's almost like the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus, that when Jesus spoke to him, he didn't know who was speaking. So it wasn't in his mind already, oh, Jesus is the Son of God, and when I hear this voice, I will respond to him. Jesus came to him, and then he said, well, who are you? So it was an experience before it was a conscious response. And I think that's the way that God works, differently in different people. Sometimes he convinces them of the truth, and that truth comes into the soul. Sometimes he goes directly to the soul, and the mind catches up afterwards.
Yeah. I remember years ago when I lived in South Korea, about 15 years ago, I ran an alpha course for the foreigners who lived in my little village for the English speakers, and it was fantastic. But I was really disappointed afterwards that I didn't have any big conversion stories afterwards. Right. And I remember emailing you about it and expressing my disappointment, and you reassured me. You said, well, look, ultimately it's our job just to do what God tells us to do and to share our faith in the best way we can, but the ultimate responsibility is of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
Into someone's conversion.
That's a dynamic that is beyond our capacity to make happen, isn't it? If a person is going to be born again, which is what Jesus talks about, they're going to be born again in the soul, and that's an area of another human being that I cannot touch. I have no capacity to influence what's going on in their soul. So that's a work of the Spirit, and he must do it. Yeah.
And to my mind, that's why evangelism, sharing our faith, must go hand in hand with prayer.
Oh, absolutely.
So closely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just serving our own pride.
Yeah.
Well, how do you handle it if you're witnessing to someone who seems a little bit aggressive or seemingly closed-minded? What kind of attitude do you try and have towards them? And is there a point where you have to give up with someone?
I think that there are several answers to that. One is that if we are sharing our faith with somebody out of love, then that love will be able to handle any aggressive response and any unkindness that we might receive from them. So that would be the first thing, that we would handle that with love and forgiveness. The other thing I think that we would have to do inside is to say, well, what's causing this person to be so aggressive? And why are they finding it so hard when I talk to them about the faith that's important to me? And so I would be inwardly asking, is there something going on? In fact, I might even confront them and say, well, why is it that what I've said makes you so cross? What is it in your background? Have you been bruised by the Christian church? Have you faced particular reversals in your own life that has caused you to be as angry with me as I speak to you about Christ?
Yeah.
So I think it would be a multiple response: love, forgiveness, and a questioning. And if they continue to be aggressive, you've got to step away then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There comes a time where you can only pray.
Yes.
Doesn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the probably people's biggest fear about sharing their faith, or what if they get a tough question or an angry reaction. So I think it's helpful to be ready for that and to understand that people are just that there's going to be baggage behind there that
Yes.
people have towards God or
Yes.
or towards Christians or the church.
Yes, but a tough question is not to be feared, and certainly rejection and aggression, but a tough question is absolutely fine, for several reasons. One is that there is pretty much no question that you're ever likely to be asked that has not already been asked and already thought about by Christians over the centuries. Who made God? And that's nothing new. And who did Cain marry? That's nothing new. These are the kind of sort of cheeky questions that people bring up. Well, Christians have thought about this and have got answers for it. And though I might not have it at the moment, there are certainly books that I can go to and people that I can ask who know more than I. And you could then continue that conversation with, look, I've checked it out. I've done some research. This is the Christian response, and this is what I'd like to say to you in answer to the question that you raised. So aggression, I think we've a reason to be a little bit concerned about that, but not about difficult questions.
Yeah. What's some advice that you would have for Christians about developing a winsome approach in their apologetics and in sharing their faith, so that we might win over hearts as well as minds?
I think humour is the biggest thing of all. That if we can establish a relationship of fun and of leg pulling and of jokes that is disarming, and it creates a closeness and common ground. It's difficult when you're talking to people who haven't got any sense of humour at all, but it's I just love humour anyway. So plenty of leg pulling, and even leg pulling within the context of the things that we may be discussing. That if what is being said really is ridiculous, all right, well then let's tease a little bit, but also to be capable of laughing at ourselves when those issues are raised that we haven't got a full answer to. For us not to be pretending that we know everything. I think that the atmosphere that we create in which the discussions take place is all important, and if we can win the person rather than win the argument, then we're well on the way to getting something of the gospel across.
Yeah, having a bit of a good British self-deprecating sense of humour.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
If you can learn to laugh at yourself, you'll never run out of comedic material. Well, have you ever had to learn from any big mistakes when witnessing towards them?
Yeah, I think that perhaps the biggest issue for me has been that I've been over intense in the past. Okay. There's a difference between the urgency of the Christian message, which is that today is the day of salvation, and you need to come to a decision. But there is also and there have been times in the past where I have overpressed that. So in more recent years, in the latter part of our time in St Michael's Aberystwyth, if I was preaching evangelistically, then I would give people 3 options rather than 2. I wouldn't be saying to them, now this is the evening of decision and it's either yes or no, but I would be saying to them, this evening I'm inviting you to make a decision, but there's a 3rd option, and that is that you may need some more time to think this through, that there are some unresolved questions in your mind, or there are issues related to the implication of commitment to Christ, how it will affect your family life, how it will affect your work, and you may want to consider that further before you make a definite decision to follow Christ. And I think that has got integrity, and I think that that's quite important, really, that we provide the space for people. Otherwise, the danger is that they'll say, "Oh, well, you applied pressure to me, or you were not blackmailing me, but not giving me the space to think this issue through. So on the spur of the moment, I made a decision which subsequently I regret." Yeah, I personally, I suffer from buyer's regret. It happens all too often that I buy something and it was an impulse buy, and then I get it home and I think, well, I don't really want it and I don't really like it. So that opportunity, that space to be able to make a considered decision, I think is very important when we're trying to encourage people to engage with faith.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of value in door-to-door ministry, knocking on people's doors and talking about God. But if someone's just suddenly asking you to become a Christian after a 10-minute conversation, it's like being asked to marry someone. It's a huge life commitment.
It is, absolutely. And yet, having said that, from time to time you come across people who are so prepared that not within 10 minutes, but within half an hour or an hour, they've suddenly seen it, and there's a moment where you can invite them to commitment, and for it to be a serious and lifetime commitment. So it does happen, but we certainly oughtn't to be engineering pressure and not giving people time to think.
And often when there's a sudden commitment, there's been a lot of gardening going on in that person's life beforehand. The writer Greg Kokel, who's written quite a few books on evangelism and answering tough questions, particularly called Tactics, writes about the importance of us focusing actually a bit more on gardening and asking the right questions and preparing the ground of someone's heart, really, before we go straight in for the harvest and to see almost the Western world around us as being ripe for gardening. Well, it's always ripe for harvest, but the gardening is needed as well, isn't it? Yeah. What are some of your favourite apologetic books or resources that have shaped you over the years or helped you out when
gracious me, shaped me. But the ones that I'm using at the moment are Justin Brierley's book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, which I think is very, very, very insightful. And I've lent it to one or two people around me here who are atheists, and so it's good for people in that sort of category to be able to see what's happened, that the new atheism has blown its puff really pretty much completely. It seemed to be so strident and confident, and that it was gaining such ground nationally and internationally, and Justin Brierley puts a completely new picture to that. So I've used that. The Air We Breathe by Glenn Scrivener I've used, again, in order to help people to see that the nation that we live in, although outward expressions of the Christian faith, like active participation in Sunday worship, has declined immensely, but we nonetheless live on the legacy of the Christian faith. Issues like compassion and integrity and justice and consent and freedom, all of these things, equality, all of these things have flown out of the Christian faith, out of the Christian gospel, out of the Bible, and this is a national legacy. And a book like that, The Air We Breathe, brings people's understanding level, it raises it to see that the Christian faith is not ridiculous after all, and can't just be rubbished and put into a corner and for people to say, well, we don't believe that anymore, because actually as a nation, we consent to these virtues and standards still, and consider them to be very important and essential to public life, and it's good for people then to see that the relevance of the Christian faith and its significance in day-to-day living. And I think that then can, to some degree, undermine people's objections to the Christian faith and begin to provide a platform for talking about Christ personally.
Yeah. I think about my parents' generation. Whenever I try to talk to my parents or others of their generation, and they think about the Christian faith, it's all images of stuffy old bishops, present company excluded, who are just completely out of touch with the world around them. But there's so much to be said for re-looking at how the society around us has been just completely shaped by the Christian faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
For good.
Yeah.
These are things that even secular and non-Christian people applaud and insist on. Consent, that's a big issue, isn't it? Integrity, it's something that we are trying to insist on where our politicians are concerned. So these are not unimportant issues. They're secondary issues. These are essential to the effective life of society and of government and of community. Yeah, it's important.
Okay, let's dig into some tough questions then, and why don't we start with some positive apologetics? What are some of the main pieces of evidence you would give to someone who said, there's no evidence for God? Or what positive reasons would you have for people to even believe in God in the first place, even to think about it seriously?
I think that the first thing that I would say in response to that is that there's a difference between proof and evidence. If we had proof, then there wouldn't be any need for faith. Everybody would believe because they had to. If God was there in the sky like the sun is there in the sky, then it's undeniable. So we don't have proof. That
would be an implication on human freedom, really, wouldn't it?
It certainly would.
We wouldn't have freedom.
We wouldn't have it. We would be compelled to believe. So, but what we do have is evidence, and the evidence put together, individually it's not sufficient, but you keep on putting pieces of evidence side by side with other pieces of evidence, and after a while it becomes compelling. I've been very interested to watch the podcast that Larry Sanger has done, the co-founder of Wikipedia, and he's come to faith after 30 plus years of agnosticism, and in the podcast he speaks about the way in which he had worked his way through systematically, question after question after question, and each one on its own not sufficiently convincing, but when he puts all of the evidence together, finds it quite compelling, if not overwhelming, and he's become a committed Christian himself as a result after all of those years of agnosticism. So what would be the evidence that we would look at? We'd have to start with the existence of the universe, of its orderliness, of the sense of reason that there is behind it, the sense of purpose. If there is no purpose, then our existence is absolutely meaningless, and so that's where I would go to begin with, would be to the creation. But then we would begin to look at things like the life of Jesus, most especially his resurrection, that normally dead people stay dead, and they stay dead. If there is a resuscitation, they will die subsequently. Jesus' resurrection is something that is completely different in character, that he is still alive, that he responds to people when they pray to him, that he makes himself real to their lives. So it's the spiritual experience. I'd be looking then at issues like where does our sense of morality come from? That here we are as moral beings, and moral behaviour is important to us. We want to behave in a civilized way rather than as animals. So where does that moral instinct come from? It seems very strange that it might have come from evolution. Doesn't it rather reflect a moral being who has made us for a moral existence and to live in a relationship with him? And that would lead me on then to issues of appetite. Here I am as a human being. I've got all sorts of appetites. I've got an appetite to eat. I've got an appetite to drink. I've got an appetite for company, which I enjoy. I've got an appetite for reproduction. And I've also got an appetite for God. There isn't a single culture in the whole of human history that has not reached out in some way or another to a divine being. Now, if I've got all of those different appetites, all of them can be satisfied, but the atheist then says, oh, you've got an appetite for God, but that's meaningless, and it can't be satisfied because there isn't a God. So I've got all of those appetites that can be satisfied, but this extra one that can't be. That's a denial somehow of me and of who I am and of the instinct, the spiritual instinct that I have in me. So those would be the kind of things that I would be debating with another person.
The greatest objection people will probably always have will be, why would an all-loving and all-powerful God allow suffering and evil in the world?
Yes.
And there are so many different approaches to that question, so many theodicies and ideas put forward about it. So how would you approach that question when confronted with it? What ideas would you put forward?
Yeah. Well, that's a fascinating subject, and to which I don't think that there is a single, simple answer. What interested me was, and I'm sure that you would know it, there's an interview with Stephen Fry that is on the internet, and the question is asked of Stephen Fry, who's an atheist, if there is a God, what will you say to him when you meet him? And Stephen Fry very angrily says, cancer in children, that's what I'll say to him. And what right have you got to inflict that upon children when we've done nothing to deserve it? So that's his comment. What I'd like to say to Stephen Fry is, where did you get that sense of justice that is driving your response to the question, what would you say to God? Where's that come from? And Stephen, how valid is that? Is that a fair question for you to be asking? Why do you care about the child that has got cancer? Isn't there something in you that has that sense of justice? The sense of justice goes very, very deep in us as human beings. Okay, so where did that come from? Why do you feel so angry? Why is that your response? Suffering is inexplicable. We know that the old saying was that it'll either make us bitter or better, and people respond differently. Two people sitting side by side with precisely the same problems, illnesses, two cancer patients in bed side by side, and one is in a position of acceptance and is seeking to live through that cancer in the company of God with his strength and resources, and the other one without, hopeless, no destiny lying ahead, angry and embittered. Of those two, I think I know which of the two I would choose. I would choose to allow the disease to take me closer to God and melt me as a person, rather than to embitter me and make me harder. So that doesn't answer your question, but it's an exploration of the issues. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a pastoral response to that, which is almost as important as giving intellectual answers and theodicies and philosophical ideas behind it, because there's always, whenever someone asks that question, there's almost always some kind of deep heart of pain behind there, or some experience.
Yes.
Yeah. I recently was helping at an Alpha course, and someone who had worked with children who'd been abused was there, and her biggest question was, well, how on earth can a loving God forgive anyone who would do awful things such as this? And that's a big question from prison guards that you'll often get as well. And the first thing I sought to do in trying to answer her question was to say, well, look, it's the fact that you feel angry about the injustices that you've seen, particularly for vulnerable people, that is the image of God inside
Absolutely.
you. That has,
Yes.
I want to justify that anger for you because it's fair, and that's how God feels. And he does have a plan for justice in the world. And there's a heaven and a hell. And that's something we don't often talk about quite as much as perhaps we should as Christians. All right. Well, where does evolution fit into the Christian worldview?
So I've never ever had a problem with it, and barely talk about it. I mean, I'm interested that you should raise the question, because in all of the times that I've spent trying to win people to discipleship of Christ, that almost has never come up. And I know that it's a big issue in the United States, that creationism versus evolutionism would be a big issue. But I've almost never had to debate that issue with anybody. And so I don't have the answers at my fingertips. I'm very content that if I'm here, how did I get here? I think that my destiny is more important than where I came from. I'm here. The book of Genesis describes a process of creation. So if God created through evolution, well then, wonderful. Well done, God. If he didn't, well, wonderful. Well done, God. He wins either way, in my view, really. Yeah.
From that point of view, it's quite an academic question in a way, really, isn't it?
I don't find that it contributes. I haven't found that it contributes in any way to a discussion about God and knowing him.
I think some atheists would say, well, it could bring into question the veracity of the Bible if the Old Testament could be proven to be false in the accounts of Genesis. I think that's the approach they would sometimes try and go down, isn't it?
Well, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But the majority of mature, thoughtful, godly Christians that I know are entirely at ease with one or other possibility, and are not struggling with it as an issue day by day that they need to resolve.
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways the book of Genesis could fit into what the few things that science does teach us about how the world has come to be the way it is today.
Yes.
I've often found questions like that, or what about evolution, what about the dinosaurs, to be almost excuse questions, almost people asking, well, I don't want to think about God, so I've had family members before, hasn't science disproven God? And I'll ask them, why do you say that? And they'll say, well, I don't know, that's just what I heard. Yeah.
Yes, if science had disapproved God, then there wouldn't be any Christian scientists. Yeah, and there are plenty of them, and have been through the centuries. Yeah.
How would you respond to people who object to Jesus being the only way to God, to Christian exclusivism?
One of the big issues today centres on what is truth, doesn't it? That truth is something that is very personal to me. So there's my truth and there's your truth, and both of those truths are true, even though they may conflict with one another. So I would prefer to stop talking about truth and start talking about facts. Now that begins to narrow down really what we're thinking. So let's take, for instance, then the conflict that there is between a Christian viewpoint and the viewpoint of another religion. So as a for instance, Buddhism says that time goes round in a circle. It says that you are born, you live, you die, and then you are reborn. You're reincarnated, and you continue to go round in those circles time and time and time again until finally you have achieved perfection, and you then go to nirvana, which is a place of non-consciousness. So that's the process, round and round and round, and then there. Now Christianity says that time is going in a straight line. So I'm born, I live, I die, and then there are two alternative destinies, either to go to heaven or to go to a place of punishment, to hell. Now those two cannot possibly be true. They can't
Together.
Factual. Let's use the word. They cannot both be factual. That is a mental impossibility. Either time goes in a straight line or it goes around in a circle. So which one is factual? Okay, then take another example. The Christian faith says that Jesus is the Son of God, that this is God incarnate, born of the Virgin Mary, and born in Bethlehem. The Muslim says, no, Jesus was not the Son of God. God is one. He couldn't possibly have a son. Now, facts, either he was the Son of God and the Muslims are wrong, or he was not the Son of God and the Muslims are right. You cannot hold those two together and say both of those are factual. So we are moving then in the arena of conflicts between the Christian faith and Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and they conflict with one another. But they don't conflict with one another everywhere. So issues like being compassionate towards the needy, being generous towards them, giving of your money and of your substance in order to help those that are in need. That's pretty much a common denominator of all religions. So it seems to me that a Christian answer is that where other religions conflict with the facts about Jesus, then they are wrong. And where they agree with the teachings of Jesus, then they're right. So not every religion is totally wrong. There is some truth in every religion, but the gold standard of the facts, of the truth, lies in Jesus himself. And there can't be any two ways about that. That this is what he taught. This is what he says about himself, about the way to the Father, about the destiny of human beings. And that's the way that it is. These are the facts. So that's what I would say in response, yeah.
Yeah, so much comes down to this kind of cultural tussle with truth, really, doesn't it? And this pushing away of the idea of an absolute truth.
Yes.
But the very statement itself of there is no such thing as absolute truth is a statement of absolute truth.
Yes.
It's ultimately self-defeating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think just helping people to realise that there's nothing offensive about saying there's one thing true and one thing that isn't is quite acceptable.
Well, what's so interesting is that this idea has been introduced into what? It's been introduced into religious thought, and it's been introduced into moral thought, but it's not been introduced into architecture or engineering. If an engineer is fitting a new piece of piping to the heating of my car, and it's out by an inch or two, he doesn't look at that and say, "Oh, that's fine, it'll do," and put it on. It's out, it's wrong, and you have to find something that will fit. Yeah. He can't play with the facts any more than an architect can, and try to put up a building on foundations that have been badly laid.
Yeah. There's only one way to drive your car, isn't there? No matter what your feelings about the matter might be.
Yeah.
All right, well, what would you say are some of the best ways to reach out to Muslims with the gospel? I'm in the middle of a module on Islam as part of my master's degree, and I've got an assignment coming up on Sunday. Have you got much experience?
I've got a couple of comments that have been sown in my mind by Brother Andrew, the God smuggler man. from years gone by, he came to preach for us in St Michael's Aberystwyth, and the focus for him had changed enormously from when the Iron Curtain, as it was, came down, and the Berlin Wall and so on, and Bibles then were flooding into Eastern Europe. There was no need for him to be smuggling Bibles any longer, and he turned his attention towards the Islamic world. And in the course of conversation, with some considerable success, and in the course of conversation, he made two remarks which have stuck with me ever since. The first is that he said Islam stands for "I sincerely love all Muslims," which I thought was just fantastic, because that as an approach towards people of a Muslim background is just absolutely wonderful. And he said that the way in which he was approaching Muslim people was to find between himself and them the common ground. And he said that Muslims are the people of the book, so they're the people of the Quran. They hold to it, they learn it by heart, they learn it in Arabic, and which they might not understand, but nonetheless they've got a high regard for the Quran. He said, we are the people of the book, we're people of the Bible, and we hold that in high regard. And he said that common ground allows some opportunities for conversation. And I thought again that was just superb. And I've listened to a number of Muslims who have become Christians. One of them I know personally, and I knew him before he was a Christian, and I've known him. I actually baptized him. He's the only Muslim, former Muslim that I have baptized. He spent the summer, whilst his wife was away, reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And at the end of it, he said that he found in the Gospels something that he didn't find in Islam, and there were two things. One was forgiveness, and the other was love. And he said that he didn't find that anywhere in Islam, and he found that was what was so attractive to him. So I would encourage, wherever I could, a Muslim to read the New Testament, to come to grips with Jesus. You mentioned earlier on a book, Nabil Qureshi. He was American of Pakistani origin. He's died now. He passed away a few years ago.
He's an alumni of my college.
There we are. He passed away in his 30s, and the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus is a very, very helpful book for leading a Muslim through the questions that come quite naturally from a person with a Muslim background. But the one most recently that I watched the debate between Richard Dawkins and Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And of course, previously they were arguing from the same position, because she was an atheist, as he was, although coming from a Muslim background. And in the course of the interview, he said to her, "Oh, you don't believe this, Jesus being born of a virgin and rising from the dead," in quite a scornful tone. And what was fascinating was her reply. She didn't turn back to him and say, "Yes, I do believe those things." She said, "What I've discovered is that Christianity is obsessed with love." Those were her words. Christianity is obsessed with love. And I thought, that's just wonderful. What a wonderful response to his scorn is this is what I'm offering you in return. But what an expression of what Christianity represents. Here is a God who loves us, who's come to earth in his person, in the person of Jesus, so that we might know him. This Jesus, the Son, the incarnate Son of God, has died on a cross so that my wrong might be dealt with and forgiven, and that there might be a future for me in heaven. And it's all because God is obsessed with love. Fabulous. So those would be the directions that I travel in if I was to if I was to engage in conversation with a Muslim. Yeah.
How would you approach the question of Christian marriage being between one man and one woman?
That's a big hot potato, isn't it? And causes a great deal of discomfort. How would I approach it? There's only one way I could approach it, and that is biblically. If you put a ruler across the Bible and you draw a straight line from the book of Genesis to the Gospels and the teachings of Jesus, to the epistles of the apostles in the New Testament. You draw a straight line from one to the other. So in Genesis, we read that it was God's intention that a man would leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two would become one flesh. So male and female marriage. When Jesus is asked to speak about human relationships, he reaffirms that without any qualification. He doesn't say we see things differently now 2,000 years later on, or I want to give you, that's what it said then, but I want to tell you now. He simply repeats the same words. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And then, reflecting upon the teachings of Jesus, we find the Apostle Paul doing precisely the same thing, quoting precisely the same words without alteration or qualification. So we've got this straight line. It's not a thread that wiggles around all over the place, but it is entirely consistent from Old Testament to New Testament, from Genesis to the Gospels to the Apostles. This is the way in which human relationships are to be conducted. And this is the relationship which God, the only relationship, sexual relationship, that God will bless between a man and a woman. So what the Bible offers to the world is chastity before marriage and fidelity within marriage. Was the great moral contribution of the Bible and of the Christian faith to the world.
Stuart, thank you for your time today. What
Not at all.
are your final pieces of advice for anyone who wants to be a better Christian apologist?
Pray a lot.
Pray. Do your homework. Study.
Yes, but even then, to be praying when we are seeking to. In the early days of my Christian faith, I thought that it was wrong to try to persuade people, that it was my responsibility to present the facts and for them to make up their minds. Paul doesn't allow me to get away with that, and he says that we ought to be persuading people. So not putting pressure, but finding the answers that there are out there, because there are plenty. As we said earlier on in the conversation, no new questions are arising in our generation that have not arisen in the past. And Christians have come up with convincing and coherent responses to those questions. Not that we know everything, there are still mysteries. So yes, we need to know need to know the arguments, and we need to be able to reason with people. But the work of converting somebody is the work of the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, your good argument is threatened by somebody else's better argument.
Something I forgot to mention is Bishop Stuart's excellent book, Recovering His Reputation, all about his time in ministry in St Michael's Church in Aberystwyth. I've learned a lot from it, and it's very humbly subtitled The Ministry of a Late Developer, something I can empathise with in my own ministerial career. So Bishop Stuart, thank you again for today.
Not at all, my pleasure.